The rope was still coiled by the door, frayed, dried blood near the clasp. He hadn't touched it in 6 months. Jack Callahan stood at the edge of the porch, boots planted in the frost-bitten wood, a coffee mug cooling in his hands. Montana's early autumn sun was slicing through the treetops like blades. Wind whispered through the pines, brushing the tops like fingers over an old scar. Shadow sat silently at his feet, upright ears, alert eyes fixed not on the woods, but the small picture frame beside the door. The one Jack had dropped. Again. Jack didn't pick it up. He hadn't picked up much since Grace died. The silence pressed into his chest like a weight. He used to like it here, the quiet, the stillness. That was the point. No questions, no reminders, just trees, weather, and the ache that dulled into routine. But this morning felt off. Shadow let out a low whimper, barely audible, then moved. Not to the woods, not to the sound of deer breaking branches in the brush, but toward the picture. Jack squinted. Don't. But Shadow nudged the frame anyway with his nose, then pawed at it. Again. It wasn't the first time. The third this week, actually. Jack exhaled slowly through his nose, set the mug down, and finally picked it up. The glass was cracked from the last time it hit the floor. Grace's face, half covered in the splintered pane, was caught mid-laugh, the sun crowning her golden hair on that mountain trail somewhere near Glacier, he thought. He had taken that picture right after she threw snow down the back of his neck. "You miss her too," Jack muttered to Shadow. The dog let out a soft huff. Jack turned the frame over in his hands. Something was there, a smudge maybe. Or a number, no. Not a number. Letters. Faded. He squinted harder. It looked like coordinates N48.71 W13.9375. What the hell? Jack walked back into the cabin, the picture still in his hands. He grabbed a flashlight and held it against the backing. There it was, scrawled in faint ink, almost invisible to the eye. It shimmered under the beam. He hadn't seen it before. Grace must have written it. But when? And why the hell would she hide coordinates inside a photo? Jack opened his laptop. Dust scattered from the keyboard. Typing felt foreign. Maps loaded slow off-grid internet, but when they finally appeared, he copied in the coordinates. It was deep wilderness. Northwest Montana, near Flathead National Forest. No towns, no roads. Just wild. And that trail. Jack's stomach tightened. That was the same area where Grace had died. He clicked the screen off. Something was wrong. He felt it in his gut, the same gut that survived Kandahar, the IED, the endless blackouts, and the 2 weeks in that Afghan village no one ever admitted they were in. Grace didn't take solo hikes lightly. She didn't die on accident. Not in gear she triple-checked. Not on rope she replaced every season. He stood motionless for a moment, feeling the ache in his knees rise as the truth clawed its way up from beneath denial. Shadow whined again. The photo. The hidden message. The wrongness in his bones. It wasn't just grief talking anymore. Something had been left for him. By dusk, Jack had packed the truck rifle gear rope rations. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, panting gently, tail thudding against the glove box like he knew. Jack looked around the cabin one last time. It didn't feel like home anymore. Just a tomb made of wood and memory. He reached into the top drawer of the desk and pulled out Grace's journal. Dog-eared, torn, mostly poetry, some field notes, mushrooms, plant behavior, migration patterns. But one line stood out now more than ever, scribbled in the corner of a page. If they find me, don't believe what they say. Follow shadow. Jack exhaled hard the way a man does when the truth hits so fast, it knocks breath out before the punch lands. He hadn't read that line before. Or maybe he had and ignored it. Either way, she knew something. And she knew one day he might come looking. Shadow whined again, louder this time, and pawed the door. "Yeah," Jack whispered, slinging the duffel over his shoulder. "I'm coming." The drive took hours through winding roads, past shuttered ranger posts, into territory that hadn't seen GPS signal in years. The stars came out slowly, like they were watching. He parked at the end of a fire road, headlights catching an old sign half swallowed by Moss Forest Service access. No public entry. Jack cut the engine. Shadow jumped down first, nose twitching. Jack followed, pack on rifle across his back. He checked the coordinates on his old wrist compass. The trail wasn't on any map, but it was there, hidden under brush, visible only to someone who knew what to look for. Grace had come this way. That thought stabbed deeper than expected, and that's when it hit him. This wasn't a breadcrumb trail. It was a message. Not for anyone. For him. 2 miles in the woods got thicker, colder. Pines pressed in like walls. Moonlight barely sliced through the canopy. Shadow stopped dead. Ears up, muscles taut. A low growl rattled in his chest. Jack crouched, raised his rifle. Nothing moved. Then a glint. Not eyes. Not metal. A camera. Mounted in the trees. He wasn't the only one watching. He was being watched. Shadow barked once, sharp, clear, and the forest answered. A low crackle of static buzzed behind them. Then a voicemail, cold, uncertain. "Identify yourself. Now." Jack didn't flinch. "Name's Jack Callahan," he called out. "Grace was my wife." Silence. Then movement, boots rustle, steel cocking. 3 figures stepped out from the trees. One of them, older, clean-cut, calm, lowered his weapon first. He stepped forward. "You'd better come in," the man said. "There's something you need to see." The gates groaned as they opened, metal grinding against frozen hinges, like a warning whispered through steel. Jack followed the man, tall, built like an ex-cop, the kind of authority you didn't argue with, past the perimeter. Shadow stayed tight at his side, his ears still twitching from the tension in the air. The 2 others flanked them from a distance, weapons low but not relaxed. These weren't paranoid hillfolk. These were trained, disciplined, watching Jack like he might combust. The compound was tucked deep into the forest, like it had always belonged there. Modular cabins, solar panels camouflaged with netting, a greenhouse nearly invisible beneath pine boughs. Satellite dishes hid behind chopped wood piles. Whoever built this place wanted to stay hidden, and knew how. The man leading him finally spoke as they passed under a motion-activated floodlight. "My name's Eli Warren, retired FBI." "Technically." His voice had gravel in it. "You know why you're here." Jack nodded once. "Grace." Eli stopped, looked him over, then motioned to a bench beside a small cabin. "Then sit. Because what you're about to learn isn't going to go down easy." Jack sat shadow, laying across his boots. Eli didn't join him. He stayed standing like a man trained never to put his back against a wall. "You found the coordinates," Eli said. "Yeah." "She left them for you," Eli continued. "But she didn't think you'd come." Jack's jaw tightened. She didn't think she'd die either. Eli didn't flinch. Maybe not. Or maybe she knew too much to be that optimistic. From one of the side cabins, a woman emerged. Mid-30s, sharp-eyed, carrying a tablet under one arm and an old-school Glock at her hip. Latina, long, black braid, no-nonsense vibe. She glanced at Jack, then at Eli. "You gonna tell him," she said, "or are we still dancing around it?" "This is April Mendez," Eli said. "Journalist, whistleblower. She used to write for Digital Rebellion before she pissed off the wrong billionaires." April slid the tablet onto the table in front of Jack. "Your wife was our founder." Jack blinked. "Grace, she built this place," April said. "Funded it with anonymous grants, crypto, and whatever intel she smuggled out of OmniGen's systems. She didn't just protect people like us, she gave us a second chance." Jack looked at the photo on the tablet. Grace hair pinned back, sleeves rolled, helping construct a water filtration system alongside Ty. Another man he'd meet later. The image blurred around the edges like it was too raw to look at straight. "She never told me any of this," Jack said quietly. April didn't soften. "Because if she had, you'd be dead too." Eli stepped forward. "Look, Jack. What Grace uncovered, it wasn't just a bad experiment or corporate fraud. It was systemic, global. OmniGen was developing biocontrol tech that could rewrite genetics, permanent, inheritable, irreversible." Jack stared at him. "Weaponized DNA." "Yes," Eli said. "Designed to be species-specific, race-specific, behavior-specific. They tested it on rural communities. Grace found the test results, encrypted them, and went underground." Jack sat back, his spine suddenly rigid. She always said they were pushing the envelope. She didn't say they were throwing it into a furnace. April pulled up another video. It was Grace standing in the forest, face framed by snowfall. "If you're seeing this," she said, "it means Jack found the coordinates. I hope it's him. If not, protect him. He'll know what to do even if he doesn't think so. He always does." Jack looked away. "She left over a dozen messages like that," April said. "Some are code. Others are just her. We think she knew they'd find her eventually." Jack exhaled. It felt like breathing out a lifetime. "I need to see the place," he said. "Where she died." Soon, Eli replied. "But first we need to bring you up to speed." Jack was led to a central cabin, part office, part command center. Inside, screens showed satellite feeds, coded messages, file structures, and a rotating display of names. Potential leaks, scientists in hiding names, crossed out in red. "Those are casualties," Eli said. "Some gave us intel. Some were just in the way." April added, "OmniGen has tentacles, lobbyists, hired guns. They're not above cleaning house." Jack stared at the screen. "So why are you still here?" Eli cracked a smile. "Because we've got one thing they don't." "Hope?" Jack asked dryly. "No," Eli said. "Shadow." Jack turned. "The dog." April nodded. "Shadow's been trained to identify certain chemical markers. Grace encoded data into objects, physical, not digital, to avoid tracking. Shadow's the key to finding them. He's already led us to 2 dead drops." Jack looked down at the dog. Shadow wagged his tail once, but his eyes stayed sharp. "I don't know what she expected from me," Jack admitted. April said it like a fact. "If you've made it this far, it means she trusted you more than we knew." The door creaked behind them. Another man walked in, big, broad, dark-skinned, maybe late 40s, dressed in thermal camo shotgun across his back. He nodded at Jack like they'd already met in a past life. "This is Ty Rivers," Eli said. Used to be recon. Now he's our security chief. Ty looked Jack over. You ever read field signals from a woman who could outthink a CIA mainframe? Jack shook his head. Ty chuckled once. You will. They gathered around a map, hand-drawn additions on top of satellite print. Ty pointed to a section labeled Grace's Ridge. That's where we found the rope, Ty said. 2 weeks after she went missing. No blood. No prints. Just rope. Frayed like a clean lab test. Jack clenched his jaw. She died out there, Ty continued. But I don't think she fell. I think she ran. From who, Jack asked. Eli stared at the map. Not who, what? The room chilled. Jack looked back at Shadow, who now sat at attention, eyes locked on the wall, a worn corkboard lined with photos, clippings, and coded notes. At the center, Grace's face circled in red ink. Not a target. A fulcrum. The woman he loved hadn't been hiding. She'd been building an army. And now he was part of it. From the corner, April cleared her throat. We want to show you something else. Something Grace left for you specifically. Jack stood slowly, pulse rising. What is it? Eli handed him a sealed pouch. It's in there. But once you open it, there's no turning back. Jack took the pouch. His fingers hesitated at the edge. Shadow barked once, sharp and clear, as if confirming the moment. Jack opened it. Inside was a collar. Leather. Old. Grace's initials etched faintly near the buckle. Shadow padded forward, sniffed it, then sat down, tail still ears back. Jack turned the collar over and felt a hard edge. He pressed it. Click. Something slid loose. A micro SD card. April gasped. That's it, she whispered. That's the key to the Croft protocol. Jack stared at it like it might burn a hole through his palm. And somewhere buried beneath all the weight and confusion, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The room was quiet as Jack slipped the micro SD card into the encrypted tablet April handed him. Every breath felt like glass scraping down his throat. Shadow sat pressed against his knee, unmoving, as if he too understood that whatever came next would change everything. A loading bar appeared, then black. Then Grace's face filled the screen. No music. No preamble. Just her tired, wind-chapped standing beneath the same ridgeline Jack recognized from the photo on their mantel. Jack, if you're watching this, I'm already gone. But not gone. Just out of reach. Her voice cracked in the video. She was holding it herself, arms tight around the lens like she was afraid someone might hear. You always told me not to go looking for trouble. Guess I never listened. But you should know I didn't stumble into this. I chose it. I dug into it. What I found, I couldn't walk away from. She turned the camera toward a hill covered in trees, then back on her face. What they're doing, Jack, it's not science, it's war. And people are dying quietly, silently, disappearing into test fields and code. Omnigen isn't curing anything. They're rewriting who gets to live. The screen glitched, then returned. I left the rest with Eli. But you... I left the key with Shadow. You'll know what to do, You always do. The screen froze on her face for a second longer than it should have, eyes wet, fierce, alive, before it cut to black. No final words. No goodbye. April let out a slow breath beside him. That wasn't the only file. She tapped through a hidden folder input. A code and a new file opened. Labeled simply Croft Protocol, Draft 6. Jack read it in silence. DNA modulation fields, remote activation vectors, chemical triggers embedded in food shipments to low-income zip codes, and worse, research trials disguised as vaccine supplements sent to rural schools across the Midwest, Montana included. He set the tablet down like it might poison him. She knew all of this, Jack said quietly. Eli leaned on the counter, eyes narrowed. She didn't just know it. She stole it. Jack turned toward him. She was the one who took the data, Eli nodded. Grace hacked one of OmniGen's research bunkers just outside of Bozeman, slipped in as an auditor with fake credentials, downloaded everything to an off-grid network. No one knew until a week later when half their internal staff got scrubbed. Scrubbed, Jack asked, already suspecting the answer. April's voice was flat. Dead. Clean kills. Disguised as suicides, overdoses, hiking accidents. Jack ran a hand over his face. She always worked late, he muttered. She always said she was behind on grant work. I never asked. Eli gave him a minute before continuing. After the download, she came straight here. Set up shop. She figured if she could shelter people OmniGen had marked scientists, journalists, techs, maybe she could buy enough time to make a dent. She didn't just hide us, April said. She weaponized us. Jack met her eyes. How do you mean? April grabbed a whiteboard, wiped it clean, and began drawing. She broke the entire operation into 3 tiers. Tier 1 exposure. That's the Croft protocol. The files, the data, the evidence. Tier 2 distribution. That's where I came in. She planted fake leaks in online forums, shared sanitized versions to bait journalists into chasing threads. Made them think they were discovering things organically. Tier 3, Jack asked. April hesitated. Tier 3 is the part that scared her. From the other side of the room, Ty Rivers entered carrying a crate of gear. That'd be me. He dropped it with a thunk. Jack turned. Your Tier 3, Ty nodded. Security extraction and counter-surveillance. Grace wanted us ready in case OmniGen tried to burn this place to the ground. Which they will, Eli added. Sooner than later. Jack's stomach clenched. She planned for war, he said. No, April corrected gently. She planned for survival. Jack looked back at the screen. Grace's face still hovered in the last frame. Frozen. Like she was watching. She wasn't the target, he whispered. She was the spear. Eli looked at him. Say that again. Jack's jaw tightened. She wasn't caught in the crossfire. She was the shot. She went after them. On purpose. April nodded. And they knew it. That's why they made it look like a hiking accident. Quiet. Untraceable. Except for the rope, Jack said. Ty raised an eyebrow. You found it? No. You did. I just didn't want to believe it. There was a pause. Heavy. Real. Then Ty reached into the crate and pulled something out. A Ziploc bag. Inside Grace's climbing rope. Cut clean. No fray, he said. No wear on the harness ring. This wasn't terrain failure. This was tampering. Jack stared at it. You think they used brittle strand? He asked. Dr. Knox stepped in from the next room at the mention of the compound. Thin, bald glasses fogging from the cold. We know they did, Knox said. Grace found traces of compound 17B on her own gear during an earlier trip. Said it smelled wrong. Had a faint shimmer under UV. She ran tests but never told us the full results. Why not? Jack demanded. She didn't want to spook the others, April said. She thought she could stay one step ahead. She couldn't, Jack whispered. Knox laid a hand on Jack's shoulder. She got farther than anyone ever did. Jack didn't reply, because it wasn't enough. It would never be enough until the people responsible were exposed. All of them. Eli cleared his throat. We want to finish what she started, but we need your help. I'm not a hacker, Jack said. I don't know how to leak intel. You're a soldier, Eli said, and this war's about to go hot. Jack turned toward Shadow, who sat beside Grace's old collar, still sniffing it now and then, like it had secrets left to tell. She trusted you, Jack said to the dog, and you brought me here. He stood. What's next? April smiled grimly. Ghost protocol. The air in the lab cabin was dry and cold, smelling faintly of bleach and burnt plastic. Jack stood in the center of the room, staring down at the tangle of rope laid out on the metal table. Grace's rope. It was coiled in sections, tagged at intervals by Dr. Knox with red markers and notes in scientific shorthand. Jack couldn't begin to decode, but he didn't need translation. He could see it with his own eyes, one end cleanly severed, not by rock or stress or time. This was intentional. Knox adjusted his glasses and gently rotated a UV lamp above the rope. A thin film shimmered into view under the violet light. Along the cut, a pale green residue clung to the inner fibers like frost on glass. There, Knox said. Compound 17B. Trade name Brittle Strand. Jack leaned in closer. The glimmer under the UV wasn't just chemical. It was wrong, artificial, oily, like it didn't belong anywhere near nature. They didn't kill her with a bullet, Knox said quietly. They killed her with science. Jack didn't move. His breath came low and controlled, but his pulse pounded like a war drum. How, he asked. Knox picked up a clipboard and tapped the edge against the table as he spoke. Brittle strand is a polymer-based agent. Reacts to temperature and tension. It's undetectable by the naked eye. Once applied to climbing gear, ropes, harnesses, anything load-bearing, it destabilizes over time. At first it holds. But the moment enough weight is applied under the right conditions, snap. Clean break. No residue. No burn marks. No trace. Looks like equipment failure. Jesus, Jack muttered. They used it in field trials in Turkey, Chile, and northern Canada. Quiet assassinations. Plausible deniability. Jack shook his head slowly, fury simmering beneath his skin. And you think they used this on Grace? I don't think, Knox said. I know. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were test results Grace had run herself. Swab samples, UV scans. The last one, dated just days before her death, showed high concentration levels on her own climbing rope. In her own handwriting, one final note. Either I missed this or they got into my gear. Either way, if I fall, it's not an accident. Jack didn't realize his fists had clenched until his nails bit into his palms. April appeared at the doorway, tablet in hand. Her voice was quiet, but steady. We just got a ping. Jack looked up. From who, he asked. Not who. Where, she replied. One of Grace's old fail-safe signals, buried inside a weather satellite feed. It just activated an hour ago. Coordinates pinged back to a known OmniGen server in Zurich. Jack frowned. Why would Grace trigger that now she's gone? April hesitated. Maybe she timed it. Maybe she planned it to go off if she didn't check in by a certain date. Maybe. She let the maybe hang in the air. What's on that server? Jack asked. Eli stepped in behind her, already pulling on a jacket. That's what we're going to find out. You, me, April, Ty, we pull intel, we prep for counterstrike. Jack turned to Knox, and the compound. We burn it, Knox said, from inside out. Strip every trace. Make it look abandoned. If Omnigen traces Grace here, they find nothing. Jack nodded. Shadow and I will scout the ridge again. She might have left something else. I'll go with you, April said quickly. Jack gave her a sideways look. She didn't flinch. You think I'm just the tech girl? No, Jack said. I think you're exactly the kind of person Grace trusted. April nodded once. Then let's find what she left. They hiked in silence for the first 2 miles. The forest was dense, but navigable deer tracks crisscrossed the trail, and the pines stretched high enough to block out the afternoon sun. Jack recognized the area now. The switchbacks, the old ranger markers, the rock outcrop where he'd once taken a picture of Grace laughing at nothing. The laughter echoed in his mind like a ghost trapped in a canyon. They reached the point where the ridge fell away sharply, a cliffside dropping into jagged stone and frozen riverbeds. April scanned the area with a handheld drone while Jack crouched near the roots of a large pine. Shadow was already digging. What is it, boy? Jack asked. The German shepherd growled low, then barked twice the same way he did when he found the collar. Jack joined him, brushing aside the topsoil. Something hard clinked beneath the dirt. He uncovered a small waterproof tube, the kind used by geocachers and special ops. He unscrewed it. Inside a SIM card, wrapped in foil, and a handwritten note. Zurich is the decoy. Cayman is the vault. Trust no one with access credentials except April. Jack handed her the card and the note. April read it, eyes narrowing. She knew they'd find Zurich, April said, so she left a trail to mislead them. Jack stood dusting his hands. Then we let them chase ghosts. Back at the compound, Eli was already prepping a mock trail, one that would point to Zurich as the main server hub. Meanwhile, Ty worked on relocating the residents. Whispering Pines would be empty within 48 hours. April and Jack worked late into the night decoding the metadata on the SIM. It was encrypted with Grace's personal cipher, a substitution code only Jack recognized from her journals. By dawn, they had coordinates. Grand Cayman, an offshore databank buried under layers of corporate shell accounts and proxy domains. Eli called it their final shot. April called it suicide if they didn't plan it right. Jack just called it necessary. You still sure about this? April asked him as they packed gear into the transport truck the next morning. Jack looked around at the cabins, the pines, the wind moving through the trees like a memory. He nodded. She died trying to make them pay, he said. I'm not letting that end with a flash drive and a eulogy. Eli clapped him on the shoulder. Then it's time. Jack loaded the gear, Shadow jumped in beside him, and April climbed into the back with her laptop and hard cases. As the truck rumbled to life and pulled away, the sanctuary vanished behind the trees like it had never existed. But Jack knew better. Whispering Pines was only the beginning. And if Grace had taught him anything, it was that the truth didn't die in the dark. It waited. Rain pattered against the small plane's windows as it descended toward Grand Cayman. The island shimmered below them, postcard-perfect beaches, sleek banking towers, and glittering resorts. But Jack wasn't here for the scenery. Somewhere beneath all that paradise was the real reason his wife was dead. Shadow sat wedged at his feet, pressed against the duffel bag, carrying their most important gear and the SIM card Grace had hidden in the forest. April sat across from him, staring at her laptop, lips tight, eyes flicking across lines of code like she was reading an obituary. We're nearly there, she said without looking up. Jack glanced toward the cockpit. Ty was flying solo. The man handled turbulence the way he handled threats, calm, even ready. Jack respected that. We'll land, refuel, and drive straight to the location, April continued. I've triangulated the coordinates Grace embedded in the sim. It leads to a private vault facility registered under the name Amaranth Holdings. Jack raised an eyebrow. Sounds fake. It is, April said. It's a shell company. But the data's real, encrypted behind a biometric lock, retina, and voice print. Grace tied both to you. Jack blinked. Me. April finally looked up. You were her fallback, her final protocol. She planned this. Jack leaned back in his seat, the weight of that truth settling across his chest. Grace had trusted him not just with her heart, but with the kind of responsibility that could burn down governments. The plane landed on a private airstrip 20 minutes later. The island heat hit like a furnace the moment they stepped out, thick and wet. Jack pulled his cap low. Ty was already unloading the equipment into a nondescript gray SUV. They drove through twisting back roads until they reached the eastern part of the island, far from the cruise ships and boutique hotels. A tall, windowless structure sat at the end of a gravel road, concrete, sterile, blank. No signs, no logo, just a single reinforced steel door with a biometric scanner. April stepped out first, scanned the tablet again, and nodded. This is it. Jack approached the scanner. A small panel lit up. Voice print required. Please state your name and clearance code. Jack hesitated. He remembered Grace telling him once jokingly that if she ever disappeared, the password would be the first sentence she ever said to him. He leaned in. You're standing in my light, soldier. Clearance code 1929, Grace Echo. A second passed, then a third. Then the door hissed open. The hallway inside was quiet, lined with metallic walls and flickering white LEDs. The vault was buried 4 levels underground. They passed 2 separate retinal scanners and a pressure-sensitive walkway that required exact footsteps. Grace hadn't left anything to chance. At the final door, April tapped a sequence on her tablet, and a drawer slid out from the wall. Inside, a black hard drive roughly the size of a paperback novel. Jack picked it up, expecting more weight. Instead, it felt strangely hollow. Encrypted, he asked. April nodded. Grace level, which means no one's cracked it. Until now. They returned to a rented safe house on the edge of the island. As soon as they entered, April cleared the room for bugs, checked the Wi-Fi blockers, and hooked the drive into a secure offline rig she'd built from spare parts on the flight. Jack watched as the screen pulsed once. Then came the file directory. No passwords, no traps, just a folder labeled Jack Final. April hesitated. You want to open it? Jack nodded. The screen lit up again. Grace appeared this time sitting at the Whispering Pines cabin. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes tired, but there was something more in them, calm. If you're watching this, it means Shadow did his job. Jack felt his throat tighten. I don't know how long it's been. I don't even know if you're still angry with me for keeping all of this from you. But I did it because I had to. Because I knew if I told you what I was doing, you'd try to stop me. And you can't stop the truth, Jack. She leaned forward. The Croft Protocol isn't just a list of crimes. It's a roadmap. It exposes who helped, who funded it, who covered it. Politicians, defense contractors, media outlets, all connected. Every thread leads to one place, OmniGen's Black Archive server. They call it the Forge. That's where everything lives, including the final sequence. Jack narrowed his eyes. Sequence. April turned. She's talking about the release vector, the final digital payload. To unlock the forge. Grace continued, they need one of two things, my original biometric keys, or yours. And since you're watching this, I'm betting they already tried mine. She smiled, then a sad, lopsided thing. There's one more thing. If they're hunting you now, if they've found the pines, you have to release this. There's no time left. They're going to scrub the forge and everyone connected to it. April tapped a few keys. The final payload decrypted and opened a massive directory of files. Names, locations, video clips, secret contracts, lab footage, experiment results. Thousands of pages. Holy shit, April whispered. It's real, it's all real. Ty, watching from the corner, just muttered, this is enough to start a war. Jack didn't blink. We don't want a war, he said. We want the truth. April nodded, already loading the files into distribution packets, setting up auto-drip releases to major global outlets, data redundancy, mirror servers, and deadman switches. But as she worked, her hands suddenly stopped. She leaned in. Jack, the forge is live. Right now. That means OmniGen still thinks it's secure. Jack stepped forward. Can we access it directly? April looked unsure. Maybe. But it would mean engaging them, letting them know we're coming. Jack turned toward Ty. You still got friends on the inside? Ty nodded once. One or two. Might be time to call in a favor. Jack looked at the screen again at Grace's frozen image. This was it. The next move would determine everything: exposure or silence. Justice or another name buried under clean lies. April looked up. We ready? Jack stepped forward. Start the clock. Rain lashed against the windows of the safe house, turning the night into static. Jack stood by the makeshift command table, staring at the real-time screen April had pulled up. OmniGen's network was pulsing with activity. Something had triggered a system-wide diagnostic. They were scrambling. Good. Shadow lay at Jack's feet, ears twitching every few seconds as if he sensed the air shifting, thickening. This isn't revenge, Jack said under his breath, watching code stream across April's monitor. This is exposure. April looked up from the rig. They know someone's in the outer gate of the forge, but they don't know who. Yet. Ty sat across from them, gear laid out on the table. Body armor, suppressors, a shortwave jammer. He was checking the battery pack on his comms when he said, They'll assume it's an internal breach. That buys us a little time. Jack nodded. How little hours? Maybe, April replied. Depends how fast their AI sniffs our signature. We're bouncing signals off 6 continents, but once they triangulate, they'll hit Cayman first. Jack ran a hand down his face. He hadn't slept in 2 days, maybe 3. But adrenaline was its own kind of clarity. I say we go on offense, he said. Hit them before they finish locking us out. April hesitated. You mean direct infiltration? Yeah, Ty answered before Jack could. Jack and I breach the forge hub. You run support from here. We pull the kill codes, leak the full data archive, and expose every bastard involved. April crossed her arms. That facility's guarded like a Pentagon black site. I know, Jack said. That's why we don't walk in through the front. Ty grinned. Tell her about Ghost Protocol. April raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a made-up plan. It was, Jack replied. Back in Kandahar. Our version of a Hail Mary. Stealth entry system inversion, rapid exfil. You flip the house upside down, make them think the attack's coming from the wrong floor while you're already in the vault. April stared at him for a beat, then smirked. All right, soldier boy. What do you need? Jack's voice was low. Everything. 12 hours later, they stood in the shadow of a quiet industrial park just outside Geneva, Switzerland. Snow flurried through the night air, melting on contact with the warm metal skin of their rented van. The forge was beneath them, hidden beneath layers of decoy businesses and dummy tech firms. Jack adjusted his thermal gloves as Ty handed him a compact breaching tool. Tunnels here, Ty said, pointing toward a storm drain disguised behind an abandoned service station. Old evac route. Grace found it in an archived blueprint. The facility forgot it existed. Jack pulled the hood of his jacket up. Let's hope they didn't remember. They moved quickly and silently. The tunnel stank of rust and old water, but it was dry. They followed it down a half-mile stretch until it opened into a maintenance shaft. Jack led the way, Shadow at his side, Ty covering the rear. At the access panel, Jack plugged in a small drive April had preloaded with a spoofed OmniGen security certificate. It blinked green. The door slid open. They were in. The sub-level of the forge was quiet, cold, and almost sterile. Dim LED panels lined the ceiling. Hallways stretched in clean, unnatural symmetry. Cameras panned slowly, blind to the spoofed feed Jack's rig was feeding back to the control room. Vaults 3 corridors west, 2 floors up, Ty whispered. You good? Jack nodded. Let's move. They didn't run. That was how amateurs got caught. They walked with the precision of men who belonged until they reached the biometric checkpoint at Vault Sector 7. Shadow sat tense but obedient. Ready? Jack asked. Ty gave a curt nod. Jack stepped up to the scanner. A small needle pricked his palm. Retina. Voice print. DNA match confirmed. Welcome, Jack Callahan. The door hissed open. Inside was a single console and a fiber optic port. The forge's brain. Cold, humming, waiting. Jack plugged in the final drive. April had prepped a distribution virus tied to dozens of media outlets, independent watchdogs, whistleblower networks. The moment it activated, April's voice came through their earpieces. We're live. Uploading now. It'll cascade globally in 10 minutes. Jack exhaled, but Ty swore. Tripwire just activated. They know. On the hallway feed, red lights blinked into life. 4-man response team inbound. 60 seconds. Jack stood. We go loud. Too late to stay quiet. Ty pulled his weapon. Jack followed. Shadow growled low. The first guard appeared in the corridor. Ty dropped him clean. A second emerged, but Jack cut him off with a shoulder and a swift strike to the temple. The firefight was tight, brutal, efficient. But it didn't matter. They didn't come to win a war. They came to deliver a truth bomb. As Jack and Ty backed toward the tunnel exit, April's voice came through again, breathless with urgency. It's done. Full data dump went through. OmniGen's stock is plummeting. Interpol flagged them. UN is calling for an emergency session. Jack Grace did it. Jack paused in the stairwell. Not him, her. This was her final act playing out, and he was only finishing what she started. They burst out of the tunnel 10 minutes later, lungs burning, sirens distant. Back in the van, April greeted them with tears in her eyes and the live stream already rolling. News anchors, government officials. Scandal after scandal unraveling in real time. Jack sat back, watching the chaos unfold. Grace had always said the truth was a slow weapon, but when it finally landed, it didn't stop burning. By nightfall, Omnigen's board had resigned. Arrests were happening in 4 countries. A mass class action lawsuit was forming. The Croft Protocol had gone viral, and Grace's name was on every headline. But Jack didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because exposure wasn't justice. It was just the beginning. The world was on fire. Not in flames, but in headlines, courtroom subpoenas, and whispers through encrypted message boards. Every major outlet was running the story, Omnigen's genetic war. News tickers crawled across screens in Times Square. Protesters filled streets in London, Tokyo, and Johannesburg. Hashtags like Forge Exposed and hashtag Croft Protocol dominated social feeds. Congressional hearings had already begun scheduling emergency sessions. The story was too big, too dangerous to be buried. But Jack knew better. Truth wasn't enough. Because when you take down a tower, you don't just collapse it. You wake the people who built it. And those people, they don't go down easy. He sat in a safe house deep in the French Alps, far from the chaos. The mountains gave them cover, cold and clean and hard to trace. April was at the far end of the room, watching 5 screens at once, each tracking fallout from the data dump. Interpol had raided Omnigen's Geneva office. Half the board had gone dark. The other half were lawyering up or leaking each other's secrets to stay ahead of the noose. Ty paced near the window, armed to the teeth. He hadn't said more than 5 words in the last hour. Jack knew why. The data had landed, but so had something else. A backdoor ping, an anonymous source, encrypted, bouncing through dead relays. A message short and sharp. You missed something. Croft was only the decoy. Ask Eli. April had caught it, pulled the headers, verified the signal. And now Jack was staring at the one question he hadn't dared ask since they left Whispering Pines. What did Eli Warren really know? April turned from the monitors, her face pale under the flickering screens. There's chatter on a dark forum called Red Window. Internal Omnigen logs. Someone's claiming a counter leak is coming. Jack frowned. A counter leak? They're trying to spin the Croft Protocol, April said. Calling it fabricated, staged. They're saying Grace doctored the data. Jack felt his jaw clench. That's a lie. April nodded. Doesn't matter. All they need is doubt. Ty growled from the window. They're laying the groundwork for discrediting everything. If they succeed, we lose the momentum. Jack's mind was already moving. The message, the ping, the one person who might be holding back more than he let on. Get Eli, Jack said. April hesitated. You sure? Jack stood. I need to know if we're still on the same side. They reached the rendezvous point just before midnight, an old church in the valley long abandoned, now used by smugglers and resistance cells alike. Eli was already there, sitting in the pews like he was waiting for Masses. Jack walked in first, shadow at his side. Ty followed, scanning corners. Eli didn't turn. You got my message? You sent it, Jack asked. I had to. April stepped forward, her voice sharp. Why hide it? Eli sighed and finally faced them. Because Grace didn't want you to know. Jack narrowed his eyes. Didn't want me to know what? Eli looked tired, older than Jack remembered, like he'd aged decades in days. She created a failsafe. Something buried deeper than the Croft Protocol. Something she feared even more than Omnigen. Jack stepped forward, heart hammering. What was it? They called it whisper code, Eli said. a secondary system built to track unauthorized experiments across shadow labs, labs even OmniGen kept off the books, black site research, human trials, stuff not even the Forge had files on. April froze. That wasn't in the leak. No, Eli said, because she didn't leak it. She locked it. Why, Jack asked. Because it doesn't just expose, Eli said. It kills. A silence dropped like stone. She built a contagion algorithm, Eli continued. Digital, not biological. It attaches to proprietary gene mapping software and corrupts it from the inside out, shuts down their ability to run experiments, deletes years of data. But April prompted. It's not selective, Eli said. Once activated, it spreads through any connected system running OmniGen code, medical research, humanitarian. Everything. Jack rubbed his face. That's why she didn't release it. Eli nodded. She believed in the truth, but she wouldn't destroy lives to share it. Ty stepped in. So why are you telling us now? Eli pulled out a chip from his coat. Because OmniGen found it. Jack's blood ran cold. They have whisper code. They don't know what it is, Eli said. Not fully, but they know it matters. They're calling it Croft's trigger. They want to use it to bait someone into activating it. You. Jack stared at the chip. If they unleash it, they'll blame Grace. Turn her into the villain. April took the chip carefully. We need to isolate this. Figure out how to dismantle it before they get any closer. Jack turned to Eli. And if we can't, then they'll win, Eli said. Not by truth, but by rewriting it. Jack didn't sleep that night. He watched April scan the chip, watched Ty lock down the perimeter, watched the screen light up with more denials, more corporate spin, more distraction. The truth was out there, but now it was fighting to survive. Because the world knows the truth. Now let's see who survives it. And Jack wasn't sure he would. The wind howled outside the Alpine safe house, pushing snow sideways against the windows. Inside, the air was tense, thick with code and unspoken fear. April sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by wires, circuit boards, and cooling fans that whirred like tiny engines of truth. The whisper code chip rested on a ceramic tile linked to 3 isolated laptops and a custom firewall she'd written in the past 5 hours. Jack stood behind her, arms crossed, trying to ignore the pounding in his chest. She created the weapon to stop them. April murmured, eyes locked to the screen, but it might end everything. Jack didn't answer. There were no good answers. Shadow lay near the door, eyes alert, ears twitching, every time a flake of snow tapped the glass. Ty sat sharpening a blade at the table, but even he was quiet, the usual smirk gone. This wasn't a mission. It was a standoff with a ghost. Grace's ghost. April exhaled. Okay, I'm going in. She launched the sandbox environment. The whisper code booted like it had been waiting. An elegant string of code scrolled across the screen, no logos, no startup splash. Just a blinking green line and 2 words, initiate sequence. April hovered the mouse. This is the trigger point. Once I click, it simulates live. One mistake and we trigger the real thing. Jack nodded once. Do it. She clicked. The screen flashed. Suddenly, a cascade of code spilled out, beautiful, terrifying. Grace's programming style was unmistakable, efficient, ruthless. Jack recognized the architecture. It's not just a virus, he whispered. It's a key. April leaned forward. A key to what not to destroy Omnigen's systems, to overwrite them. Lines of command began to unfold across the simulation. Identify Omnigen root systems. Extract all files flagged human trial. Destroy research backups, experimental data. Notify global watchdog agencies in real time. Lockout re-entry protocol indefinite. It wasn't a blunt force tool. It was surgical. She wasn't trying to burn everything April breathed. She wanted to shut them down without collateral. But she knew the risk, Jack said. If this spreads beyond Omnigen, it'll wipe hospitals, universities, charities, anyone who licensed their tech. April sat back. A code like this doesn't stop. Once it replicates, it becomes extinction level. Ty finished. Jack turned to him. How fast can they deploy it? Ty frowned. If they know what they have ours. If they trigger it accidentally. Minutes. April spun her laptop around. There's only one way to stop it. I need to rewrite the failsafe Grace embedded at the core. You can do that, Jack asked. She hesitated. Maybe. But I'll need the original build environment. The one Grace used. Jack's pulse kicked. Where April looked at him. Back at Whispering Pines. Jack's stomach dropped. We burned it. No, Ty said from the corner. We rigged it to look burned. The server bunker might still be intact if the ice didn't collapse it. April looked at Jack. It's our only shot. He didn't hesitate. We go. 12 hours later, the transport chopper skimmed over the Montana range, slicing through wind and cloud. Snow blanketed the landscape, but Jack recognized the contours of the valley. The charred remains of Whispering Pines lay ahead, ash-blackened timber twisted solar racks. But Grace's bunker had always been buried beneath Cabin 4. They touched down half a mile out and hiked the rest. April carried the modified Whisper Code chip wrapped in a lead-shielded box. Jack led the way, Shadow at his heels, Ty watching their flank with eyes like blades. Cabin 4's roof had collapsed inward, but the hatch to the bunker was still hidden beneath what looked like a pile of scorched rock. Jack pried it open. Cold air hissed out like the breath of the past. They dropped into the darkness. Inside, dust swirled in their flashlight beams. Old equipment lay scattered, monitors dark, the air stale and electric. Grace's bunker hadn't been touched. April powered the core terminal. The old server coughed to life. Jack watched her reconnect the chip. We only get one shot at this, she said. He nodded. Then don't miss. She launched the code in isolation. Jack felt the room tighten. On screen, the Whisper Code blinked. The simulation was live again. April opened the core. Okay, she whispered. I see it. She hid the heartbeat loop in a recursive shell. Brilliant. Ty shifted beside them. You're saying words again. I'm saying Grace coded a conscience into it. A morality check. If certain flags are triggered like hospitals' nonprofits, the code slows down and pings for human authorization. Jack leaned in. Then we can rewrite the response exactly. Grace built it to be stopped. Then do it. For 30 minutes, April rewrote the core logic, working around Grace's traps, preserving the structure, removing the annihilation vector. Her fingers danced across the keys. Jack could almost feel Grace in the room. Her scent, her mind, her warnings. He didn't speak. He just watched the woman he loved, still fighting through code. And then April stopped. It's done, she said. She exhaled, clicked a key, and watched the test rerun. This time, when the system flagged a hospital server or an open-source research node, it paused, notified, rerouted. The kill switch had been rewritten. Jack stepped back, stunned. Shadow whined softly, nudging Jack's leg. "It's still dangerous," April said. "But now it's targeted, controlled. Now it's a scalpel," Jack said, "not a bomb." Ty cocked his head. "So, what do we do with it?" Jack looked at the whisper code. "Then the lead box. We use it if they try to reboot. If they try to bury the truth again, we end them surgically." April nodded. "Then we need to get this somewhere safe. Off-grid." "I know just the place," Ty said, a grin returning to his face. They climbed back out into the Montana snow, the bunker ceiling behind them like a tomb. Grace had built the code. Jack had survived the fallout. Now it was time to make sure no one could ever use it again. Snowflakes whipped like bullets across the sanctuary's walls as the first shot rang out. Jack ducked behind a sandbag wall near the southeast watchpost, adrenaline pulsing through his chest like a second heartbeat. He glanced at Ty, who crouched across from him behind a stone pillar, eyes locked, rifle steady. "We're not protecting a place," Jack said through gritted teeth, reloading. "We're defending the truth." Shadow was already gone, a blur of fur and instinct weaving through the chaos toward the west flank, where Lena's makeshift server rig hummed inside the greenhouse. The sanctuary, once a place of peace and protection, had become a battlefield. Omnigen had come hard. Black-clad mercs in staggered formations, equipped with thermal imaging, suppressed rifles and kill orders. But they'd underestimated what it meant to fight people with nothing left to lose and everything to expose. Jack peered over cover. 2 enemies advanced near the water tower. He fired. One dropped the other dove for cover. Ty flanked wide and caught him in the shoulder, driving him down. "Status!" Jack shouted into his comm. April's voice crackled in his ear. "Upload at 42%. Lena's stable, but they're cutting power nodes." "Hold the grid," Jack barked. "Whatever it takes. We've got backup," she said. "FBI is en route 30 minutes out. We don't have 30. Ty motioned him. "More coming from the ridge." Jack signaled Eli on the rooftop. Moments later, a scoped rifle cracked precision and fury. One merc spun and fell. Another ran right into Ty's fist. Inside the greenhouse, Lena hunched over the console, breathing hard. Her hands flew across the keyboard. The signal was holding, but just barely. A shadow moved outside. A soldier was approaching silently, knife drawn. Then a growl. Fast, sharp, primal. Shadow. He lunged, intercepting the attacker mid-stride, teeth flashing in a blur of gray and black. The man screamed and collapsed. Lena turned just in time to see the dog plant himself between her and the door, unshaken, unwavering. "Good boy," she whispered, and got back to work. Back outside, the gunfire was relentless. Jack's shoulder ached from recoil. Ty had taken a graze to the leg, but kept moving. Eli had switched to short bursts, precise shots conserving ammo. Jack ducked behind a wall and checked his comm. "April, how's the grid?" "We lost Node B," she said. "But I rerouted through the solar bank. Upload at 68%. "They're going for this greenhouse next," Ty warned, nodding toward a squad moving in from the north. "I'll flank," Jack said, grabbing a smoke grenade. "Cover me." Ty laid down suppressive fire while Jack circled behind the incoming squad. He pulled the pin and lobbed the smoke between them. White haze exploded outward. Confusion. He emerged from the mist rifle up, taking them out one by one. 2 down. One tried to flee, but ran directly into Eli's crosshairs. The assault slowed, then stopped. A lull. They regrouped behind the wall. Jack wiped blood from his forehead and looked at Ty. They're rethinking. Ty nodded grimly. Not for long. Inside, April paced behind Lena. 82%. We're close. Lena's voice was steady now, all nerves hardened into resolve. Their backdoor scrambler is trying to corrupt the hash. I'm rerouting to mirrored nodes. Hold the line, April said. Jack entered the greenhouse panting. Shadow followed fur, speckled with snow and blood. Jack kneeled beside Lena. You good? She didn't look up. We've got one shot. If they kill the power again, they won't, Jack said, eyes locked on the door. The lights flickered. April froze. Generators, Lena muttered. Someone's at the backup units. Jack turned. Ty with me. They sprinted through the central courtyard toward the generators, old diesel backups behind the south shed. Smoke drifted in the wind. One unit was on fire. A merc crouched behind it with a canister in hand. Ty tackled him mid-motion. They wrestled through the snow. Jack aimed, fired a warning shot. The merc dropped the canister and ran, but not before whispering into a comm unit. We've got 5 minutes, Jack said. Tops. Back at the greenhouse, Lena's hands were shaking. 93%. They're trying to jam the final packet. April yanked the secondary antenna cable and plugged it into a new feed. Manual override, boosting uplink. Jack burst in, breathless. Time. 30 seconds, Lena said. Don't breathe wrong. The room went quiet. Outside, the whoop, whoop, whoop of incoming helicopters cut through the air. Ty smiled. Sounds like cavalry. Eli's voice came through the comm. Eyes up. Blackhawks inbound. That's our ride. Percent, Lena whispered. A shadow moved outside the greenhouse again. Jack raised his weapon. Then a voice rang out through a megaphone. This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Lay down your weapons. Repeat. Drop your weapons. You're done. The remaining mercenaries froze. Some resisted. Most didn't. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and worst of all, exposed. Inside the greenhouse, the screen blinked once more. Upload complete. Transmission locked. Backups secured. Lena slumped back in her chair. April wiped tears from her face. Jack leaned down and pressed his hand gently to Shadow's head. The dog licked the blood on his knuckles. It was done. But outside, the world was only just waking up. Eli approached with a tired grin. Croft's forces are being rounded up. Ty looked at Jack. Think they'll try again? Jack didn't smile. Oh, they will. But next time we won't just be ready. We'll be waiting. April turned to the glowing server tower. We just proved something. What's that? Lena asked. That truth fights back. The storm had passed, but the war wasn't over. Not yet. The world didn't believe in monsters until now. 2 days after the Whispering Pines siege, the floodgates opened. Footage from the Croft Protocol had been mirrored across the globe. The files, interviews, trial records, hidden lab footage, manipulated DNA data. Everything Grace had gathered and Jack's team had risked their lives to protect spilled across every platform imaginable. The world saw it all. In New York, protesters gathered outside Omnigen's towering headquarters, waving photos of victims and burning the company's insignia. In Berlin, massive projectors lit up buildings with excerpts from Grace's farewell video. In Johannesburg, a statue of Julian Croft was defaced, repainted in blood red with one word, liar. In Montana, the sanctuary was now an active investigation site. The FBI had taken full control, though several agents unofficially thanked Jack and Eli's crew for handling what Washington couldn't. Federal teams moved carefully through the compound, collecting equipment and taking statements. Most of the team had remained on-site coordinating with legal advisors and journalists who flooded in after the initial sweep. Jack sat under a pine tree at the edge of the property, a mug of bitter coffee in hand. Shadow curled beside him, both watching the morning fog lift off the snow-covered ridge. April joined him, tablet in one hand, wrapped in a thick army jacket. "It's happening," she said. Jack didn't look away from the valley. How bad? April scrolled. Croft's been indicted. Multiple counts: conspiracy, bioterrorism, manslaughter, human experimentation, obstruction. The works. Jack sipped his coffee. He'll fight it. He's trying, she said. But the footage of that call with you? It's everywhere. The arrogance alone. Jack gave a humorless chuckle. He thought he was untouchable. Until you touched him. April turned the screen toward him. Dozens of headlines blared across the screen. Global giant Omnigen implodes after leak. Whistleblower's legacy sparks. Worldwide ethics reform. The Grace effect, a movement begins. "I didn't do this," Jack said quietly. "She did. She lit the match," April said. "But you carried it through the storm." Nearby, Lana walked out of the main lodge, arm in a sling from the shrapnel wound she'd taken when the comms relay blew. She looked pale but determined. "We've got over 600 whistleblowers reaching out," she said. "Scientists, tech workers, even a few CEOs. People are ready to talk." April looked at Jack. "They're calling it the Truth Cascade." Jack stood slowly, wincing at the dull ache in his side. "Then it's time we give them a place to land." He walked toward the central courtyard, Shadow following, his boots crunching in the frost. The compound, once hidden and defensive, had become a beacon. Reporters stood at the outer perimeter. Volunteers arrived daily. A logistics tent was being erected near the garden. Dr. Knox approached from the lab building. Interpol just froze Omnigen's offshore accounts. Cayman, Zurich, Singapore. They're dismantling the network. Jack raised an eyebrow. "That fast Croft's people are flipping to save themselves," Knox said. "Grace's data was too solid. No one wants to go down with him." Eli joined them, carrying a thick folder. "Got something else." He opened it to reveal a printed request, notarized federal letterhead. "They want to convert Whispering Pines into a protected investigative zone," Eli said. "And when that's done, they want us to lead the post-collapse infrastructure for bioethics reform." Jack blinked. "They want us to what?" "Set up a foundation," Eli said. "In Grace's name. Turn her death into the seed of something permanent." Jack was silent. His throat tightened. April stepped up. "It doesn't have to be just about whistleblowers. It can be about rebuilding trust, protecting what matters." "She didn't die to be remembered," Jack murmured. "She died so others could live." He looked out toward the old greenhouse, now transformed into a makeshift operations hub. Hannah stood by the door, directing volunteers. Ty leaned against a jeep, arms crossed, surveying the perimeter like he still expected shadows. But they weren't running anymore. They were building. Jack looked down at Shadow. The dog met his gaze, ears alert, tail twitching. "I'm in," Jack said. Eli nodded. "Then let's do it right." That night, as snow began to fall again, the team gathered in the central lodge. The fire crackled. Mugs of coffee and whiskey passed between scarred hands. They were bruised, tired, but no longer hunted. Lena gave an update on the Whisper code patch. The final security layers had been verified. It was safely sealed in a vault in Switzerland under dual biometric lock. April reported that a dozen NGOs had reached out offering partnership support. Knox had a full panel of scientists ready to audit every remaining OmniGen product on the market. And Jack. Jack stood at the head of the table staring at a new sign April had printed and hung above the fireplace, Grace's Light Foundation. In truth, there is protection. He swallowed hard. The grief didn't vanish. It never would. But for the first time, it didn't hollow him out. It pointed forward. She was always ahead of us, he said, voice low. She built this while I was still trying to protect something smaller, something simpler. No one interrupted. Jack continued. She saw the whole field, the cracks in the system, the danger of silence. And she didn't run from it. She faced it. Alone. Until now. April placed a hand on the table. She didn't want to be a martyr. She wanted us to finish what she started. We will, Eli said. Jack nodded. From this moment on, no more hiding. No more silence. We fight with light. Outside, the wind shifted. The valley stretched wide and silent under moonlight. Shadow barked once, sharp, clear. Everyone turned. A group of young people had arrived at the gate. Scientists, journalists, ex-OmniGen employees. Eyes tired, shoulders burdened, but faces determined. They had come seeking sanctuary, and found something more. She didn't die to be remembered. She died so others could live. The words were etched in weathered steel on a new plaque outside the rebuilt greenhouse, now the cornerstone of the Grace's Light Foundation. It had only been 3 weeks since the siege, but Whispering Pines no longer resembled the survivalist bunker Jack had first walked into. The fences were still there, but open during the day. The security towers stood, but they were no longer manned with rifles. The forest path was marked now with signs that read, "Sanctuary begins here. Truth lives here." Volunteers arrived daily. Some were ex-OmniGen scientists who had been too afraid to speak. Others were journalists, data analysts, and legal advocates. Jack watched from his porch one morning as a dozen newcomers stepped off a converted military truck, their backpacks bulging with hard drives and sealed boxes of evidence. They weren't here for protection. They were here to fight. April leaned against the railing beside him, nursing her 3rd cup of coffee. "We've got people from 11 countries now," she said. "Brazil, Ukraine, Taiwan, all bringing material, all terrified, all ready." Jack nodded slowly. "How's Lena sleeping?" April replied. "Which is a miracle. She finished the Mirror archive last night. We now have 10 offline backups of everything spread across 5 continents. If someone tries to silence us again, they'll have to silence the world." She smiled faintly. "That's the idea." Shadow barked once, drawing their attention to the south gate. A man with gray stubble wearing a navy peacoat and a fatigue green duffel bag approached. Hannah opened the gate and exchanged a few words before waving them in. "Another one?" Jack asked. "Yup. That's our 7th today." Jack exhaled. The flow wasn't slowing. It was growing. They'd hit critical mass. Inside the Foundation's new strategy room, once Grace's lab, a massive whiteboard dominated the wall, covered in names, arrows, legal deadlines, and encrypted code names. Ty stood beside it, briefing the team. "Croft's first trial date is locked. 17 charges. DC Circuit Court. High security." "Is he cooperating?" Jack asked as he entered. "No," Ty said. "He's lawyering up with money that won't matter. Every time he tries to spin the story, another leak hits." Grace buried her sources well. Jack nodded and turned to Knox, who was inputting data at the analysis terminal. "What about the compounds?" Knox tapped the screen. We've confirmed 32 genetic trials altered under the brittle strand model. 10 led to fatalities. 5 were deployed in agriculture without regulatory approval. April winced. That's how she found out, wasn't it? She saw it leaking into the environment. She saw everything Knox said, and still chose to stay. Jack turned toward the window. She had died on that mountain, but her reach had only grown. Eli stepped in holding a folder. We've been invited to speak at the Geneva Ethics Summit. Jack raised an eyebrow. You, Eli smirked. You and April. They want Grace's story told. Truthfully, entire sessions dedicated to whistleblower protections and data transparency. April glanced at Jack, then back at Eli. That's a big stage. It's time, Jack said. Grace didn't risk everything, so we'd hide her in the woods. The next day, they hosted their first official public broadcast, live-streamed globally, hosted from the sanctuary under the tall pine Grace once carved her initials into. April took the mic first, standing in front of a simple backdrop, the Foundation's emblem, a light piercing through broken strands of DNA. We are not a cult, she began. We are not a rebel cell, and we are not anarchists. We are survivors of truth denied. And now we're building a world where that truth has a home. Applause echoed through the clearing, even through speakers broadcasting online. Next came Lena, then Eli, then Knox, then Jack. He stepped forward slowly, holding a worn photo of Grace, the one of her laughing, beside the waterfall, eyes squinting from sunlight, happiness etched in every corner of her face. I didn't know the woman I married, he said. Not completely, and that's on me. I wanted to protect her. She was trying to protect everyone. He let the silence settle before continuing. She didn't die to be remembered. She died so others could live. We carry her name not as a symbol, but as a mission. His voice didn't waver. We don't fight with bullets anymore. We fight with truth, with light. Cameras clicked. People cried. Somewhere Grace was smiling. Later that evening, Jack walked the sanctuary's perimeter, not because he had to, but out of habit. Old instincts, old ghosts. The wind was softer now. Snow had begun to melt. Grass fought through frost near the eastern trail. Shadow followed him, pause, silent. Jack stopped near cabin 4. The roof had been rebuilt, the structure reinforced. Inside the bunker remained sealed, a tomb and a cradle at once. He opened the door gently. Inside, Grace's old research had been carefully archived. Shelves were labeled. Her handwriting was preserved on the whiteboards. Her desk remained untouched. He sat, pulled a small box from his jacket. Inside was Grace's wedding ring. He placed it on the desk and whispered, I hope we made you proud. Behind him, Shadow let out a soft chuff, then rested beside the doorway. The world beyond whispering pines had changed. But here in this valley, something deeper had taken root. The next morning, Jack stood on the ridge with April, Ty, Lena, and Eli. Below them, the compound buzzed with life. Volunteers moved supplies. Engineers ran fiber lines. 2 new buildings were going up, one for whistleblower housing, the other for a classroom. Lena pointed toward the north path. Kids are coming next week. High schoolers. Ethics training. Grace would have liked that, April said. She'd have insisted on it, Jack replied. Ty slapped his shoulder. You know we're not bad at this leadership thing. Don't get cocky, Jack muttered. Laughter. Peace. The battle was over, but the work had only begun. The snow had melted. Grass pushed up through the thawed soil, flecked with early spring wildflowers. Whispering pines breathed again, not as a place to hide, but as a place to begin. Jack stood at the top of the ridge with Shadow beside him, eyes scanning the valley below. From this height, the entire sanctuary looked like something reborn. The buildings were no longer camouflaged or hidden. Solar panels gleamed in the light. Trails curved through the trees like veins feeding a living body. Kids were laughing near the south garden. A small classroom had been built from reclaimed lumber, and through the open windows came the sound of someone teaching ethics, transparency, responsibility. Jack tucked his hands into the pockets of his jacket and took a slow breath. "I followed her ghost," he said softly, "and it led me home." Shadow chuffed beside him like he understood. For months, the mission had consumed him, the grief, the guilt, the fury. And now that the fire had settled, all that remained was the quiet hum of something Grace always believed in rebuilding. Down in the main courtyard, April stood beneath the large pine tree where Grace had once carved her initials as a young environmental intern. The letters had weathered over time, worn, but still visible GC. They were sealing it in resin this week to preserve it, not as a relic, but as a reminder that truth has roots. April waved him down. Jack descended the path slowly. His knees ached from old injuries and his shoulder twinged from a lifetime of service, but the pain was no longer something that controlled him. It was simply part of the cost and part of the proof that he'd made it through. April was holding a letter. "From Geneva," she said. "The Foundation's been formally nominated for the Global Transparency Award." Jack blinked. "Is that a real thing?" she smiled. "It is now." He took the letter but didn't read it. Instead, he looked around, really looked. The transformation was undeniable. Lena was in the distance, walking with two new arrivals toward the intake office. Ty supervised the planting of new saplings along the eastern fence line, showing a group of teens how to layer mulch properly. Dr. Knox was on a video call, likely with an international watchdog agency, given the number of languages on the screen. Whispers of grace were everywhere, but they weren't whispers anymore. They were echoes of purpose. Jack walked to the memorial stone they'd installed in the garden. It was simple, unpolished granite with just one sentence carved into it. She turned silence into signal. He knelt, placing a single wildflower at its base. Shadow sat beside him, tail-curled eyes alert as ever. Jack spoke softly. "You were right, Grace. About all of it." He touched the stone gently. "We thought strength was silence, that staying quiet kept people safe. But you knew the truth. Real strength is telling it anyway, even when it costs everything." Behind him, the sanctuary moved like a small town with purpose. People were planting, building, teaching, healing. Grace's light had become more than an organization. It was a blueprint, and it was spreading. Other sanctuaries were opening in Canada, Sweden, Brazil. Refuge hubs for those with dangerous truths, not to expose recklessly, but to protect with integrity. Whispering Pines had become a symbol not of rebellion, but of renewal. April joined him at the stone. "I used to think journalism was about breaking stories," she said. "Now I think it's about building something better after the story breaks the world open." Jack nodded. She'd like that. They stood there for a while saying nothing. Then Jack turned to her. "You staying for a while," she said. "The world doesn't need me chasing smoke anymore. It needs signal boosters." He smiled. Later that evening, the sanctuary held its first Night of Light, an annual tradition they decided to begin in Grace's honor. No speeches, no press, just candles. Everyone lit one and placed it somewhere on the land that had changed them. Ty put his candle near the workshop. Lena placed hers beside the server hub. April walked to the greenhouse and set hers inside Grace's original microscope station. Jack took his and walked out past the tree line into the forest, where Grace had first led him in spirit all those months ago. He found the stump where he'd sat alone, haunted and lost, trying to decipher her clue. Now he wasn't haunted. He was anchored. He placed the candle on the stump, struck a match, and lit it. The flame flickered steady against the wind. Shadow settled beside him, laying his head on Jack's boot. For a long time, Jack stood there, not thinking about war or secrets or missions. Just peace. The kind Grace had died for. The kind she'd earned. Back at the compound, the candles glowed like constellations on the earth. Quiet voices, gentle laughter, soft music drifting on the air. The next chapter of the world was already being written. By survivors. By truth-tellers. By the brave. And by those who finally understood that silence was not safety, it was surrender. Grace never surrendered. Jack wouldn't either. Not now. Not ever. He turned back toward the compound, toward the people still working, still trying, still healing. The stars above blinked softly. The trees whispered. And as Jack walked back into the light, shadow at his side, the valley closed behind them, not in darkness, but in quiet, enduring peace.